Thanks, David. I'm delighted to be here to talk with you all this morning. And interesting, usually when I talk at these things, they're outside of the U.S. Most of my comments have been made in other countries because they have really begun to recognize in a significant way the real impact of higher education in developing their national competitiveness. And then there's some fascinating trends going on globally. But one thing I want to say is that the U.S., since World War II, has remained and still is the predominant higher education force in the world. Most countries still look to the U.S. higher education system as a model. They see it as an innovator. They see it as probably the first truly liberated higher education system where students can pursue a curriculum they want to pursue. If you look at the Shanghai Jiaotong rankings that come out of China now every year on the world's greatest universities, 17 out of 20 are located in the United States. More students study abroad in the United States than they do in any other country in the world. We have 4,200 colleges and universities that allow students a selection of degrees that most students in other countries would be envious of. We have a great system in the U.S. However, we've had such a great system for so long, we've become blinded to what's going on globally. And there's some very interesting trends going on that I think it's important for us to be aware of because these other countries are slowly creeping up on us. For the first time in the 28 years that the Institute for International Education has been tracking foreign students studying abroad, the U.S. has lost their market share. Our market share is beginning to decline in the number of students studying abroad. In part, that was because of 9/11. Students found it more difficult to come into the United States and they began to look elsewhere. And at the same time, other countries began to see foreign students as a way to increase their own national competitiveness. They wanted to bring in students into their economies. And so you have places like the United Kingdom and places like Australia increasingly recruiting the students who used to come to the U.S. into their own systems. But more interestingly is that they're beginning to attract our institutions into their own countries to begin building up their own economic development sectors. What's happening in the Middle East is particularly fascinating. Unlike what we see in Egypt, where you have a system where you're producing many more college graduates than you have jobs available. On the other side of the Middle East, in the GCC countries, which are the Gulf comparative countries, which would be Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, names we've heard around here, Abu Dhabi, of course, being involved in the microfab center up north, as well as Sheikh Khalifa out of Dubai has his horses up at Saratoga, so they are familiar with this area. They're importing higher education. They're importing our system of higher education because they recognize it being important. Abu Dhabi has given NYU $60 million just to become interested in coming into Abu Dhabi and opening up a campus. They have now invested hundreds of millions in NYU opening a campus over there. Their campus is conveniently located between a branch of the Louvre and a branch of the Guggenheim. I think it's a great place to be. But it's more importantly, they're paying all the costs. And they're paying for students from around the world to come to their campus and attend a humanities-based education because they recognize that that's what they need for moving on in a post-petroleum world. Dubai is doing a very similar thing. They've imported 30 campuses from around the world, from Australia, and from the UK, and from China, from the US, Russia, France, UK, and I could go on, because they say we need a globally recognized education system that is preparing a globally recognized workforce to do work here in Dubai, where they have many more jobs than their own citizens can fill, but as well as beginning to sort of move on elsewhere and extend the reputation of Dubai and Qatar. China is doing the very same thing. We have campuses over in China. They're partnering with our higher education systems. India is now beginning to open up its borders. They want to import higher education from other countries to help meet the demands for higher education going on. The examples I'm giving here are to illustrate that higher education in the U.S. is very important, and it's recognized as being a very important entity and a very successful entity. And these other countries are turning to our own institutions now to serve the public goods needs that our country wants to serve higher education for. Unfortunately, we're beginning to defund higher education in a way, in an era when other countries are beginning to invest in higher education and invest in our own institutions. So SUNY, of course, is being cut. It's been cut significantly over a number of years. Yet Buffalo has programs going on in China and in India. Stony Brook is looking to put up a campus in South Korea. Part of the reason is they are looking elsewhere for the resources they need to be successful as institutions, whereas our own governments are no longer funding public education the way they once did to fill economic development. I want to pick up on something that happened on a quote this morning in the TU. I was quoted about talking about the decline of quality at SUNY when we begin to cut funding. If you think about higher education, we have three main sources of revenue. We have tuition, we have state appropriations, and we have public-private partnerships. Those are the three main ways that we can get funding. Unfortunately, well, most states, when they defund their state appropriation or cut it, they allow institutions to increase their tuition. Right? We're not allowed to do that in the same way. We have a very interesting system here. It's the last state in the nation where the legislature still has absolute control of tuition, which is fascinating. But globally, the developing world is putting more money into higher education because they see it as something that's being important to building them up. Cuomo talks about the fact that higher education is important for innovation, is important for economic development, and yet not putting the money and the resources into higher education in a way to allow them to be successful. Higher education is a resource-intensive organization. It's primarily labor-based. We have people who come in and we do workforce development. Right? We train the future workforces of the world. And yet we're not allowed to do that in a way that is of quality, well, the quality we would like to do, because the money is being cut back, state appropriations. This is happening in other countries. We're seeing in a lot of the developed world. Britain, of course, is cutting back significantly on what they're doing. France is cutting back significantly. But Germany, which is doing very well right now, is investing large amounts of money, millions of dollars of money, in revising their system, because they realize that they need a strong higher education system to be successful down the road. What we are entering right now is basically what is being called the Great Brain Race. Countries are realizing that we need that their future national competitiveness is going to be based upon the intellectual capacity of the systems of the intellectual capacity of their citizens and the people who are working in their systems. And so we're seeing more and more countries becoming more and more competitive in recruiting students from other countries and recruiting institutions from other countries. And the U.S., unfortunately, has been so strong for so long that we don't realize what's going on internationally. And one of my discussions with students in other countries is they're now looking at China and they're now looking at India as places to go and study. That countries in Southeast Asia are reorienting themselves around China and India because they see them as the increasing superpowers. Their systems are beginning to reorient around China and around India. We are actually beginning to lose students coming from those countries because they are now beginning to study abroad in China. They're looking to study abroad in India because they see it as the next place to get a job. And the U.S. is declining. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's a fascinating market that's going on outside of the U.S. and one that we have been very insulated from for a long period of time because we've been so good. And so I'll stop my comments there, but essentially what I think is important to say is that we really need to look at higher education as an investment. We all know that. We're here because we think that SUNY is important. We think that the University of Albany is important. But it's important for New York State, and it is important for the United States that we become more globally engaged, that we look not just in terms of sending our students abroad, that we look at bringing more students into New York State. We do a very good job of that right now, but even more can be even better. But that we need, in order to do these things, we need to invest in public higher education. And we need to develop systems of higher education that are strong and successful and have the resources necessary to do the things they need to do to train the next workforce, to engage in economic development, to engage in research and innovation that NANO has been doing, and hopefully we can do elsewhere. So, thank you.